Hello everyone, Kultured Khun here. So today I want to talk about consciousness. I'm going to start a new series based on consciousness. And what consciousness is a heightened state of awareness. So when you're acutely aware of your surroundings or a situation. And in today's first installment of that consciousness series, I want to talk about class. So class consciousness. Class has to do with your standing in society, whether that be your social, economic status, or your job, your education, your background, your religion, and it interlinks to how life plays out for all of us as individuals. So I want to start this by telling a little story. And it's a story about a time when I was in a car park, right? And I remember it was dark, it was late. I think it must have been like past 8 p.m. And for those of you who live in Zambia, you know there's cantembas, which are like, I don't know how you describe it in English. It's kind of like I don't want to say illegal, but like a cardboard shop. It's like it fits a person or two. And usually people here sell all sorts of things, whether it's like airtime, data, you can deposit money sometimes, you can buy bread, you can buy all sorts of little things. And so anyway, I was on the run. For those of you who know, on the run in Kablonga off Bishop's Road right there. And I was sat there. I think I was waiting for my mom. She went into the pharmacy. She was getting some meds and stuff. And there were these kids they were around an Mbaula. In English, a brazier, like an outdoor oven. Yeah, so they had the charcoal and they had the grill and they had some maize, and there was a little kid running around this broken toy. And he looked so happy, you know what I mean? He was buzzing. And I remember looking at him watching, and a tear jerked from my eye. I was like, what's going on? You know what I mean? And I was actually envious of that moment, of that energy, of that ownership, of just that space he had, because I came from a place where most of the things I've wanted, I've gotten. Most of the things I've really wanted or need, I mean, I've never had to struggle for anything really. My main focus has been school. And luckily, I'm a very wealthy man. I have a family that love me. I have friends that support me. I have people who take interest in my story. So I have this wealth in relationships. I have this wealth in people who care about me. There's dynamics which people would go to war by my side with God, for me. And it's a beautiful thing. And yet here I am with all I have in the world, everything that kid probably wants. But yet he was so happy. This broken toy, and the corn cob, the maize, the melis on the oh. Anyway, I raised that story because I wanted to highlight some of the unknowns amongst the upper class and just in around the classes. So with class consciousness, I want to open you guys' eyes, because I think we're all aware of the breadth and the wealth distribution across the world, but we're not necessarily certain on the depth to which that affects the individuals that occupy those standings in society. So I obviously can't speak to struggle. I'm not going to lie and pretend like that's my story. That really pisses me off when people are disingenuous and try to borrow other people's stories in the name of authenticity or in the name of getting down with the people. That's not me. That's not my life story. In large part, my parents have been successful. My family's been successful. And I've been surrounded by success. So the belief is success breeds success and confidence breeds confidence. So I am confident in my ability to carry on their legacy and the legacy passed on to me from the lineage of leadership, whether it's directly from my nuclear family or my extended family or just even the family friends of the people I know. I'm very grateful for their example and their sacrifices in my life and their service, into this economy. But on talk, obviously following the Afro-Saxon series, I want to talk more critically about, education. And a lot of people think education is what it's not. People, at least in Africa, we value an education that sets you apart from the rest of the people. We don't value an education that localizes you, that indigenizes you. We value privilege as a passport to prosperity. And oftentimes you find that the more educated you are, it's typically the more Western or Eastern you're thinking, the less African you are. And unfortunately, we don't attribute success or value or high status to Africans. Your average African, or at least the definition of an African, when you ask an African what they think of Africa, they don't think of top flight institutions or top flight students or top flight individuals or high net worth people. We usually think of middling or low income laborers or starving kids who need charities from 33 cents a day, who are just funneling funds so they can write off taxes in offshore accounts. And I want to speak to that misinformation. Education for me has always been about problem solving. Education for me has been about input to output. So versus the information input, what is the value of your output, whether it's your words or your actions? What's the translation of the ideologies in your mindset when put into action? How do those affect you or the people around you or the people you love or the people you claim to support? You know what I mean? And so I'm in this awkward position where I have to choose whether or not to be a sellout. And many of us, are sellouts, and many of the talented individuals in Africa, you have to be a sellout. And I don't mean have to, but you ought to be, because you won't maximize your potential here. And oftentimes, we have conversations with our parents, with our elders, with people in our life. It's like, oh, you don't belong here. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, no, you won't be appreciated here. We've got that small mind frame where you're pigeonholed, and the economy just can't sustain you. We won't utilize your talents to the maximum extent. And I'm at this crossroads where I have to decide to be the lamb sent into the slaughterhouse, or the lion sent to slaughter the lambs. And it is this Christ-like imagery of the lamb and the lion. Sometimes you have to be a lion to really be the lamb. And this idea of being a lamb, being a sacrifice, being pure, being innocent, being a symbol of joy, a symbol of precious possession. And then being a lion, obviously, it's an image of predation, being a predator, being a hunter, being the apex at the top of any food pyramid. And you find that a lot of us who are educated in these white institutions adopt the mindset of a lion, of a Caesar. So I believe I have the conqueror's mindset, and I have for the longest time. And it shows in my attitudes towards my endeavors and all the institutions or the enterprises I've gotten involved with. There is that go-getter, there is that aggression. But here, we preach a message of humility and minimization. And I speak about this, how we've inbred an inferiority complex, which for me is stupid, because we are the penultimate continent. We are the ultimate continent. We are the first continent. We are the prime continent. We're the greatest continent, the oldest continent, the oldest people. We're the only continent which has all stages of human development from beginning to end. And without us, the world at large wouldn't exist. And I speak globally, because even this class system, I think it was just put in place to divide people. I've been acutely aware of my class, of my standing in society for a long time. I'm credit to my dad and my mom, but more especially my dad, with making me see life for what it is, making me see the idea of people take life in their own imaginations. So when you ask people about people, oftentimes it's a positive or negative light. It's very rarely an objective observation. So even if you ask people in Zambia about politicians, you get an automatic response, thieves. If you ask people about whites, you get an automatic response, land grabbers, colonialists, colonizers. You know what I mean? And it's ultimately this idea that perception is reality, and how you see the world is the world. So if you change your perception, you will then change your reality, meaning you change the world, because you change how you orient yourself on this relational plane that we all exist. And so I've been doing some thinking about class consciousness and how, certain things like dealing with authority, my attitude towards authority, how I believe I have rights, or how I carry myself with a certain energy, how I have a confidence in any room I go into, whether it's full of white, black, Indian, Chinese people, whatever it is, even just in institutions, I'm at ease. For a lot of people who can't read or can't write or can't verbalize in English or any of these accepted languages of instruction, you find that they look down on themselves, and you find that it eats away at their dignity, not being able to stand up for themselves. And I think that's the case for a lot of Zambians, actually, is we have a population where most of the people live a life adjacent to abject poverty, and that's the reality. So I'm part of the top maybe 20, 15, maybe even 5% socioeconomically, for being realistic. I mean, globally, I'd probably be more of a upper middle classman with my education and my qualifications and my family background. But here, because the situation is so dire, I am in this upper echelon, which I shouldn't occupy. And I think money shouldn't be a measure of merit. I think I've been saying this for a long time. I think we need alternative measures of merit because, like I said in my videos prior, the best ideas often aren't held by people with the most money. And people with the most money often don't have the best intentions for the rest around them, because oftentimes you have to choose whether to be in the business of ethics or in the business of business. And if you are in the business of business, if you are a Mark Wahlberg, not a Mark Wahlberg, my bad, a Mark Zuckerberg, if you are a Rockefeller, if you are a Kennedy, if you are from the Medici clan, if you are a Rockefeller, if you are a Roosevelt, if you are, from these heralded high-class historic European families, even African families to a certain extent, that you are then given this godlike status because you have captured the means of production. And people center themselves around you because they're dependent on you for their lifestyle, their living. It does something to them, psychologically, physiologically. They walk in rooms differently. The presence they come around with, it feels like a different creature from a black person. And I've mentioned class and race, but I'll speak more on color and race as the series develops. But I want to focus more on the structure of class and the imprisonment of individuals in that, what can I call it, oppressive regime. So class it's a strange thing to me, because you have to face survivor's guilt, especially for those who are in higher class. I mean, I know a lot of white people suffer with this, is the idea that you are now guilty for the sins of your ancestors, and you carry the weight with them, all the sins, all the tribulations, all the trials they put the rest of the people through. And I will talk a bit about this in the videos to come, but survivor's guilt is some real shit, man. It's like, it's hectic. I've mentioned before, I'm from a privileged background. I've been to good schools. I've been to better schools than most people, even most people in the countries that I went to those schools. And I did well in those schools. I did better than most people have done in those schools as well. And so I am burdened with the task of liberation of the others, whether it's my family, my friends, and people around me. And oftentimes, they don't even have to say it. It just shows in their actions, their reliance on you, their dependence on you. They're looking to you for leadership. And it's a position imposed on you because we are so warped in this mindset that only the people who walk, talk, think, and are socialized with whites can save us. And that's not the case. It's how we found ourselves with political structures that were plundered because people were out for profiteering themselves in their pockets and prostituting their minds and their skills to get that back. But speaking again with class, it's such a it's such a menace. It's so hard to describe. It's so strong, the system of class, you get what I mean? Because you wake up, all around you, you see poverty, you see the signs of suffering, and I have a soft heart. I'm highly sensitive to suffering, and you find that people do take advantage of me because of that kindness in my heart, and I don't mind. It's okay. It's what it is. I've I have a warm center from which I orient myself. My mother has a warm heart, and I think I've inherited that from her. And with that, you go into the world and you just feel everyone's pain. People want to project their pain onto you. They want to project their prejudice and stereotypes of the people who've oppressed them and done horrible things to them. And yes, maybe it was people who walked and talked and sounded like you. Maybe it was people who fit your profile as a person, as an individual, as a youth, as a beneficiary of the system that has upheld class. And I can accept that. But, when you're offering a hand to help and people want to spit on that hand, or people want to, revoke or rebuke you and all you've ever achieved, or attribute it to, again, that same status or privilege, it's a hard thing, because now you find that you don't really know who you are. You don't know what you're worth, because people want to posit their ideas and beliefs onto you. They, as I mentioned before, they take an idea of you, give that idea life, and add to it their own imaginations, their own, procrastination. They add to that same idea of you, which has nothing to do with you, good, bad, or otherwise. And that's how they move in the world. And granted, I've been a victim to that too. I have had prejudice, stereotypes, biases towards certain people, given life to those biases, prejudices, and then met those people and had to kill those ideas. And it was a painful process, because now you have to recalculate all your precognitions about people, perception, and everything in life. And I want you guys to do the same, because the story I shared before of how in the pursuit of happiness, we think the accumulation of wealth or the accumulation of resources or just material things, it gets stuffy, because I said I've had everything I've ever wanted. I've never had to suffer, and I'm thankful for that. But I've never felt as happy as a kid who had much less than me and had broken bits and pieces that was holding him together. He looked so happy. It brought a tear to my eye, because I realized how much of an empty vessel I felt. I realized how vast the vacuum in my chest cavity was. And that explains to a lot of people, at least if you see it for what it is, why you find more suicides or attempted suicides or mental health issues amongst the higher class people. Is because once you pass your basic needs, you then have to move up in the hierarchy, and you find there's that disconnect between this soft life, this superficial setting which has been put up for you, where you've been protected and isolated from the real troubles of reality. And you have to face yourself, because all you have to yourself is time to think. You don't have time to worry. You don't have time to hunger. You don't have time to starve. All you're thinking about is you, because everything else means nothing to you. And then you find people going on pilgrimages. You find people trying to declutter the mind and everything, and even their attachment to labels, and whether it's brands or being gay or being black or being this or being that. You're like, what does this really mean? Because all of this is arbitrary. I have everything. I've never had to struggle for anything. And I think struggle gives meaning, so it's why oftentimes we give praise to the rags to riches story. It's why we look towards people who've dug themselves out of the dirt. And for those people who've maintained a high socioeconomic status, we kind of just pass off, because we believe it was easy. And the reason why we believe it was easy is because we've never been there. We don't have a clue on what we're thinking about, what we're trying to imagine. And I say this because I think there need to be more conversations had, unilaterally. I think we need to speak more horizontally across classes. I think the people of upper class, like me, can do more to help. People of the lower class, I think, also could give some of us grace, because, you could educate us. You could be the one to change our lives, because if we look at a lot of the doctrine that runs the world, if you look at the Moses, the Davids, the Jesus, the Abrahams, the Muhammads, these were lower class men. Some of these were fishing men, and they carried themselves with a grace that called to order all classes, lower, middle, and upper. And oftentimes the saved one, the savior, the anointed one, the Christ figure, will rarely ever be someone like me, the chosen one. My life and my meaning and my purpose comes from grooming the minds of the people below me, even though they may be spiritually regarded as higher than me, to step into their souls, to step into their purpose, to step into their divinity. And I can't do my job if you don't do yours. And I think we all need to call ourselves to order. So I think as upperclassmen, we need to be more educated, and we need to be more proactive about educating and becoming educators. As middle classmen as well, we all need to focus on that enlightenment, focus on seeing beyond the labels, seeing beyond being a Spognono, seeing beyond being a Mayadi, seeing beyond being the legacy kid. You can teach these children, and oftentimes you find we'll be more submissive in your lessons than some of your own children, because for us, we've lost that love of the leadership in our lives. Oftentimes, a lot of us are pained by the people who have put us in these positions because we're burdened with the proof of performance. And everywhere we go, we have to prove why we're here. Like for me, in my previous video, I mentioned how I've been a stellar student since I could walk, and yet I still get questioned on my credibility as a man, as a young man trying to impose his influence on the world. I still get questioned by people who don't even have half the credentials, questioned by people who don't even have a certificate of schooling. And granted, school isn't everything. Granted, the papers are meaningless, the papers are arbitrary. But where do we give credit when credit is due? Do we only give credit to those who've never had credit? Do we only give credit to those who haven't benefited from the credit system? Do we give credit to only those who've suffered and struggled through unimaginable pains? I want to ask these questions. I want to have these conversations. I want to be involved in such dialogue. And, if you are someone like me, if you are someone maybe of a middle class or upper class background, if you're someone who never had to worry about school fees, never had to worry about the clothes on your back, fetching water, hunting for your food, going days, just fasting, just sleeping, because there's nothing to eat, there's nothing to look forward to. If you've never had to experience that and you're finding yourself lost in this world, if you find yourself, you're a nomad in a place where people don't know what to do with you, they're either too intimidated to approach you, or they hate you for what you represent to them in their lives. You're a symbol of their suffering. You're a symbol of the oppression that they've been subjected to. I want you guys to take a moment and think to yourselves, am I doing all I can do? Am I fully aware of why they hate me? Do I hate me? Do I have this self-hatred? Do I have an inferiority complex? Do I have a superiority complex? Do I see myself as God because everything I've wanted and wished for has come to my hand by a command? I've told my parents to do this and do that, and they did it. I told my grandparents, I told my auntie, I told my uncle, I told my brothers, my sisters, my cousins, my friends. I want you to have that conversation. I want you to visit the person inside and check that internal dialogue. And if you're not someone like me, please help. If you're someone on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're someone who's suffered, if you're someone who can see through my vices, if you're someone who can help, you can enlighten us and you can grow us to be great. You can help us get you to where you're going. And I think ultimately I want this message to be one of connection. I want this message to be one of harmony. I want this message to be one of peace and love. I'm not a man who has many material possessions relative to the standing of being rich or wealthy. But I mentioned before, I have my riches in my relationships. I have people in my life that love me. I have women, I have men, I have children who look to me as someone who has a net positive in the world. And I'm thankful for that, because ultimately, what more would you want? But moving forward, I want people to reach that point of peace. I want people to reach that point of self-actualization. I want people, older, younger, the same age as me, to have these same thoughts, these same feelings about themselves, and to be in alignment with what is really going on with their actuality. So for those of you who received this message, I hope you've got something which changed your life. I hope you've got something new which you can share with your kids. Sorry for the swear earlier in the video. But anyways, peace, love, stay blessed. Cultured Khun.